A Witch's Denver by Helena Blavatsky. Our amiable host Shamrao was very excited during the remaining hours of our visit. He did his best to entertain us and would not hear of our taking leave of the region without having seen its greatest celebrity, its most interesting performance. A magic-working sorceress, well known in the district, was at that moment under the influence of 7 sister goddesses, who possessed her in turns and spoke their prophecies through her lips. Shamrao said that we must not leave before seeing her, even if only out of scientific interest. The afternoon was drawing to a close, and once again we prepared for an excursion. It was only 5 miles to the cave of the Pythia of Hindostan. The road traversed a jungle, but it was flat and smooth. Besides, the jungle and its fierce inhabitants had ceased to frighten us. The timid elephants we had in the dead city had been sent home, and we mounted new colossi belonging to a neighboring king. The pair that stood before the veranda like 2 black hillocks was steady and reliable. Often this pair had taken part in the hunt for the royal tiger, and no savage howl or thunderous roar could frighten them. And so we were to begin. The reddish flames of the torches dazzled our eyes and heightened the darkness of the forest. All around us, everything seemed so dark, so mysterious. There was something indescribably fascinating, almost solemn, in these nocturnal journeys into the farthest reaches of India. Everything was silent and deserted around us. Everything was static on the earth and above. Only the heavy and regular tread of the elephants broke the stillness of the night, like the sound of hammers working in the subterranean forge of Vulcan. From time to time, strange voices and murmurs were heard in the black forest. "The wind sings its strange music among the ruins," said one of us. "What a wonderful acoustic phenomenon!" "Ghosts! Ghosts!" whispered the frightened torchbearers. They brandished their torches and quickly spun around on one leg, snapping their fingers to ward off the aggressive spirits. The mournful murmur faded into the distance. The forest was once again filled with the cadences of its invisible nocturnal life, the metallic chirping of the crickets, the faint and monotonous croaking of the frog, the rustling of the leaves. From time to time, the noises suddenly ceased and then began again, gradually growing louder. Heavens! What abundant life! What reserves of vital energy were hidden beneath the smallest leaf, the most imperceptible blades of grass, in this tropical forest. Myriads of stars shone in the dark blue of the sky, and myriads of fireflies gleamed at us from every bush, moving sparks, like a pale reflection of the distant stars. We left the dense forest behind us and reached a deep valley, bordered on 3 sides by the thick forest, where even by day the shadows are as dark as at night. We were about 600 meters above the foot of the Vindhya range, judging by the ruined wall of Mandu, just above our heads. Suddenly, a very cold wind rushed up toward us and almost extinguished our torches. Caught in the labyrinth of bushes and rocks, the wind furiously shook the branches of the blossoming syringas. Then it ran freely and returned along the valley, howling, whistling, and roaring, as if all the demons of the forest had gathered in a funeral dirge. "Here we are," said Shamrao, dismounting. "Here is the village. The elephants cannot go any further." "The village? Surely you are mistaken. I see nothing but trees. It is too dark to see the village. Furthermore, the huts are so small and so hidden by the bushes that, even during the day, you would hardly find them. And there are no lights in the houses, for fear of the spirits." And where is your witch? Do you mean to say that we shall watch her performance in complete darkness? Sham Rao cast a furtive and timid glance around him, and his voice, when he answered our questions, was somewhat tremulous. I beg you not to call her a witch. She might hear you. She is not very far, no more than 800 meters. Do not allow this short distance to shake your resolve. No elephant and not even a horse could get there. We must walk. But we will find plenty of light when we arrive. This was unexpected and far from pleasant. To walk on this gloomy Indian night, to walk amidst countless cacti, to venture into a dark forest full of wild animals. This was too much for Miss X. She declared that she would go no further. She would wait for us in the carriage on the elephant's back and perhaps go to sleep. Narayan had been against this pleasure trip from the beginning, and now, without explaining his reasons, he said she was the only sensible person among us. You will miss nothing, he observed, by staying where you are, and I only wish that everyone would follow your example. What grounds do you have for saying that? Protested Sham Rao, and a slight note of disappointment sounded in his voice when he saw that the excursion, proposed and organized by himself, threatened to come to nothing. What harm could be caused by her? I will no longer insist that the incarnation of the gods is a rare sight and that Europeans almost never have the opportunity to witness it. But, besides that, Kangalam is no ordinary woman. She leads a holy life. She is a prophetess, and her blessings cannot be harmful to anyone. I insisted on this excursion out of pure patriotism. Sir, if your patriotism consists in exhibiting the worst of our plagues before foreigners, then why did you not order all the lepers in your district to gather and parade before the eyes of our guests? You are a village headman, you have the power to do so. How bitter Narayan's voice sounded to our unaccustomed ears. He was usually so calm, so indifferent to everything pertaining to the outside world. Fearing a quarrel between the Hindus, the colonel remarked in a conciliatory tone that it was too late to reconsider our expedition. Furthermore, without being a believer in the incarnation of the gods, he was personally and firmly convinced that demoniacs truly existed even in the West. He was anxious to study every psychological phenomenon, wherever he found it and whatever form it might assume. It would have been an impressive sight for our European and American friends if they had beheld our procession on that dark night. Our route stretched along a narrow and winding path up the mountain. No more than 2 people could walk abreast, and there were 30 of us, including the torchbearers. Surely some reminiscence of the night attacks against the Confederate Southerners had been revived in the colonel's breast, judging by the readiness with which he assumed leadership of our little expedition. He ordered all rifles and revolvers to be loaded, dispatched 3 torchbearers to walk ahead of us, and organized us into pairs. With such a skillful leader, we had nothing to fear from the tigers, and so our procession began to slowly ascend the winding path. It cannot be said that the indiscreet travelers, who appeared later at the den of the prophetess of Mandu, sparkled with the splendor and elegance of their attire. My dress, as well as the traveling clothes of the Colonel and Mr. Y, were almost torn to shreds. The cacti had collected whatever tribute they could, and Babu's disheveled hair was swarming with a whole colony of grasshoppers and fireflies, probably attracted by the smell of coconut oil. The robust Sham Rao panted like a steam engine. Narayan was as usual, that is, like a bronze Hercules armed with a club. At the last sharp turn of the path, after overcoming the difficulty of climbing huge scattered boulders, we suddenly found ourselves in a perfectly flat place. Our eyes, despite our many torches, were dazzled by the light, and our ears were struck by a medley of unusual sounds. A new narrow valley opened before us, its entrance well masked by thick trees. We realized how easily we could have walked right past it without even suspecting its existence. At the far end of the narrow valley, we discovered the dwelling of the celebrated Kangalam. The den, as it turned out, was situated in the ruins of an ancient Hindu temple, in a fair state of preservation. In all probability, it had been built long before the Dead City, because during the time of the latter, pagans were not allowed to erect their own places of worship, and the temple was quite close to the city wall, in fact, right below it. The domes of the two smaller side towers had fallen long ago, and enormous bushes grew from their altars. That night, their branches were hidden under a mass of brightly colored rags, pieces of ribbon, pots, and various other talismans, because, even in them, popular superstition sees something sacred. And are these poor people not right? Did these bushes not grow on sacred soil? Is their sap not impregnated with the incense of offerings and the exhalations of the holy recluses who once lived and breathed here? The erudite but superstitious Sham Rao would only answer our questions with more questions. But the central temple, built of red granite, remained untouched by time, and as we later discovered, a deep tunnel opened just behind the closed door. What lay beyond, no one knew. Sham Rao assured us that no man of the last 3 generations had crossed the threshold of that thick iron door. No one had seen the subterranean passage for many years. Kangalam lived there in perfect isolation, and according to the oldest people of the district, she had always lived there. Some people said she was 300 years old. Others claimed that a certain old man on his deathbed had revealed to his son that this old woman was none other than his own uncle. This fabulous uncle had settled in the cave in the times when the dead city still counted several hundred inhabitants. The hermit, busy paving his way to moksha, had no contact with the rest of the world, and no one knew how he lived or what he ate. But a long time ago, in the days when the Baladi foreigners had not yet taken possession of this mountain, the old male hermit suddenly transformed into a female hermit. She continues his activities and speaks with his voice, and often in his name, but she receives worshippers, which was not her predecessor's practice. We had arrived too early, and the Pythia did not appear at first glance. But the square before the temple was full of people, and it was a wild, albeit picturesque, scene. An enormous bonfire burned in the center, and around it was a multitude of naked savages, like black gnomes, throwing whole branches of the sacred trees to the 7 sister goddesses. Slowly and uniformly, everyone jumped from one leg to the other, singing a single monotonous musical phrase, which they repeated in chorus, accompanied by several drums and tambourines. The muted trill of the latter mingled with the echoes of the forest and the hysterical groans of 2 little girls, who were lying under a pile of leaves by the bonfire. The poor children had been brought there by their mothers in the hope that the goddesses would take pity on them and banish the 2 evil spirits that possessed them. The 2 mothers were quite young and squatted on their heels, expressionless and sad, staring at the flames. No one paid us the slightest attention when we appeared, and later, during the entire time we remained there, these people acted as if we were invisible. If we had worn a cloak of darkness, they could not have behaved more strangely. They feel the approach of the gods. The atmosphere is full of their sacred emanations. Sham Rao strangely explained, looking reverently at the natives, whom his beloved Heckle could easily have mistaken for his missing link, the race of his Bathybius Haeckelii. They are simply under the influence of liquor and opium, retorted the irreverent Babu. The spectators moved as if in a dream, as if they were all just half-awake sleepwalkers, but the actors were simply victims of St. Vitus' dance. One of them, a tall old man, a mere skeleton with a long white beard, stepped out of the circle and began to whirl dizzyingly, with his arms open like wings and loudly grinding his long wolf-like teeth. It was painful and disgusting to watch. He soon fell and was carelessly, almost mechanically pushed aside by the feet of the others still engaged in their demonic performances. All this was frightening enough already, but many other horrors were in store for us. Awaiting the appearance of the prima donna of this forest opera company, we sat on the trunk of a fallen tree, ready to ask countless questions to our accommodating host. But I was barely seated when a feeling of indescribable astonishment and horror made me recoil. I beheld the skull of a monstrous animal, of a kind I could not find in my zoological recollections. This head was much larger than the head of an elephant skeleton. And yet, it could not be anything but an elephant, judging by the skillfully restored trunk, which descended to my feet like a gigantic black leech. But an elephant's head does not have horns, whereas this one had 4 of them. The front pair was attached to the flat forehead, bending slightly forward and then spreading out, and the other 2 had a broad base like the root of an elk's antler, which gradually narrowed almost to the middle and had branches long enough to decorate at least a dozen common elks. Pieces of transparent amber-yellow rhinoceros skin were stretched over the empty eye sockets of the skull, and small lights lit behind them only enhanced the horror, the diabolical appearance of this head. What could this be? Was our unanimous question. None of us had ever seen anything like it, and even the colonel looked horrified. "It is a Civatherium," said Narayan. "Is it possible that you have never encountered these fossils in European museums? Their remains are quite common in the Himalayas, although, of course, in fragments. They were named in honor of Shiva. If the collector of this district hears that this antediluvian relic adorns the cave of his, which, observed Babu, it will not adorn it for many days." Around the skull and on the floor of the portico were heaps of white flowers which, although not very antediluvian, were entirely unknown to us. They were the size of a large rose, and their white petals were covered with a red powder, the inevitable accompaniment of all Indian religious ceremonies. Further on, there were piles of coconuts and large brass plates full of rice, each decorated with a red or green candle. In the center of the portico, there was a strangely shaped censer, surrounded by candelabras. A little boy, dressed from head to toe in white, was throwing handfuls of aromatic powders into it. "These people who gather here to worship Kangalam," said Sham Rao, "do not actually belong to her sect or to any other. They are devil worshippers. They do not believe in the Hindu gods. They live in small communities. They belong to one of the many Indian races that are generally called hill tribes. Unlike the Shanars of South Travancore, they do not use the blood of sacrificial animals, nor do they build separate temples for their Buddhas. But they are possessed by the strange fancy that the goddess Kali, the wife of Shiva, has from time immemorial borne a grudge against them and sends her favorite evil spirits to torture them. Save for this slight difference, they hold the same beliefs as the Shanars. God does not exist for them, and even Shiva is considered by them to be an ordinary spirit. Their chief worship is offered to the souls of the dead. These souls, however just and amiable they may have been during their lifetime, become after death as wicked as possible. They are only happy when they are torturing men and cattle, as the opportunities to do so are the sole reward for the virtues they possessed when incarnated. A very wicked man is punished by becoming, after his death, a soft-hearted ghost. He loathes his loss of boldness and becomes completely miserable. The results of this strange logic are not bad, however. These savages and devil worshippers are the gentlest and most truth-loving of all the hill tribes. They do whatever they can to be worthy of their final reward. For, mind you, they all wish to become the most wicked of demons. In high spirits over his own cleverness, Sham Rao laughed until his hilarity became offensive, considering the sacredness of the place. A year ago, some business matters took me to Tinnevelly, he continued. Staying with a friend of mine who is a shanner, I was allowed to be present at one of the ceremonies in honor of the demons. No European has yet witnessed this worship, whatever the missionaries may say. But there are many converts among the Shanars, who freely describe them to the priests. My friend is a wealthy man, which is probably the reason why the demons are especially cruel to him. They poison his cattle, damage his crops, his coffee plantations, and persecute his numerous relatives, sending them sunstroke, madness, and epilepsy, diseases over which they have special control. These wicked demons have settled in every corner of his spacious estate, in the woods, in the ruins, and even in his stables. To prevent all this, my friend covered his land with stucco pyramids and prayed humbly, asking the demons to draw their portraits on each of them, so that he could recognize and worship them separately, as the rightful owner of this or that particular pyramid. And what do you think? The next morning, all the pyramids were found covered with drawings. Each of them bore an incredibly strong resemblance to the dead of the district. My friend had known almost all of them personally. He also found a portrait of his own deceased father among the others. Well, and was he satisfied? Oh, he was very happy, very pleased. This allowed him to choose the right thing to satisfy the personal tastes of each demon, you see? He was not upset to find his father's portrait. His father was rather irascible. He had once almost broken both his son's legs, administering a paternal punishment with an iron bar, so he could not be very dangerous after his death. But another portrait, found on the best and most beautiful of the pyramids, intensely surprised my friend and threw him into a panic. The entire district recognized an English officer, a certain Captain Pole, who during his life had been such a kind man. Really? But do you mean that these strange people also worshipped Captain Pole? Of course they did. Captain Pole was such a worthy man, such an honest officer that, after his death, he could not help but be promoted to the highest rank of Shannar demons. The P. Koval, the house of the demon, dedicated to his memory, stands next to the P. Koval Bhadrakali, which had recently been conferred upon the wife of a certain German missionary, who had also been a lady of great charity and, therefore, is now very dangerous. But what are their ceremonies? Tell us something about their rites. Their rites consist mainly of dancing, singing, and killing sacrificial animals. The Shanars have no castes and eat all kinds of meat. The crowd gathers around the P. Koval previously designated by the priest. There is usually the beating of drums and the slaughter of fowls, sheep, and goats. When Captain Pole's turn came, an ox was killed, and special attention was paid to the peculiar tastes of his nation. The priest appeared, covered in bracelets and holding a staff on which countless bells jingled, wearing garlands of red and white flowers around his neck and a black cloak, upon which were embroidered the most terrible demons you can imagine. Trumpets were blown and drums beat incessantly. And, I forgot to mention that there was also a sort of violin, the secret of which is known only to the Shanner priests. Its bow is quite ordinary, made of bamboo, but they say the strings are human veins. When Captain Pole took possession of the priest's body, the priest leaped high into the air, and then ran up to the ox and killed it. He drank of its warm blood and began to dance. But what a shock he was in as he danced. I am not superstitious. Am I? Shamrao looked at us questioningly, and I, for my part, was thankful at that moment for the fact that Miss X was half a mile away, sleeping in the howdah. He whirled and twisted, as if possessed by all the demons of Naraka. The enraged crowd yelled and howled as the priest began to inflict deep cuts all over his body with the bloody sacrificial knife. To see him, with his hair blowing in the wind and his mouth covered in froth, to see him bathing in the blood of the sacrificed animal, mixing it with his own, was more than I could bear. I felt as if I were hallucinating. I imagined that I too was whirling. Shamrao stopped abruptly and remained quiet. Kangalam stood before us. Her appearance was so unexpected that we all felt abashed. Carried away by Shamrao's description, we had not noticed either how or from where she had come. Had she appeared from beneath the earth, we could not have been more surprised. Narayan stared at her, widening his large black eyes. Babu clicked his tongue in total confusion. Imagine a skeleton 7 feet tall, covered in brown leather, with the tiny head of a dead child attached to its bony shoulders. Eyes so deep-set and, at the same time, radiating such diabolical flames throughout your whole body that you begin to feel your brain will stop working. Your thoughts become entangled, and your blood freezes in your veins. I describe my personal impressions, and no words of mine can do them justice. My description is too weak. Mr. Y and the Colonel grew pale beneath her gaze, and Mr. Y made a movement as if he were about to stand up. Needless to say, this impression could not last. As soon as the witch turned her glowing eyes toward the kneeling crowd, the impression vanished as quickly as it had come. But even so, all our attention was concentrated on this remarkable creature. 300 years old. Who could say? Judging by her appearance, we might well have conjectured her to be 1,000. We were contemplating a genuine living mummy, or rather a mummy endowed with motion. She seemed to have been withering since creation. Neither time, nor the evils of life, nor the elements could ever affect this living statue of death. The destroying hand of time had touched her and stopped right after. Time could do no more and so had left her. And with all this, not a single gray hair. Her long black curls gleamed with a greenish sheen and fell voluminously to her knees. To my great shame, I must confess that a repugnant recollection sprang to my memory. I thought of the hair and nails of corpses that grow in graves, and I tried to examine the old woman's nails. Meanwhile, she remained motionless, as if suddenly transformed into a hideous idol. In one hand, she held a plate with a burning piece of camphor. In the other, a handful of rice, and she never took her fiery eyes off the crowd. The pale yellow flame of the camphor flickered in the wind and illuminated her deathly head, almost touching her chin, but she paid no attention to it. Her neck, as wrinkled as a mushroom and as thin as a stick, was encircled by 3 rows of gold medallions. Her head was adorned with a golden snake. Her grotesque, almost non-human body was covered by a piece of saffron yellow muslin. The demonic little girls raised their heads from under the leaves and let out a prolonged, animal-like howl. Their example was followed by the old man, who was exhausted from his frantic dance. The witch shook her head convulsively and began her invocations, rising on tiptoe, as if moved by some external force. The goddess, one of the 7 sisters, was beginning to take possession of her, whispered Sham Rao, without thinking of wiping the large drops of sweat streaming down his forehead. Look at her. This advice was quite unnecessary. We were looking at her and nothing else. At first, the witch's movements were slow, uneven, somewhat convulsive. Then, gradually, they became less angular. Finally, as if catching the cadence of the drums, leaning her entire long body forward and writhing like an eel, she ran around the blazing fire. A dry leaf caught in a hurricane could not fly any faster. Her bare feet trod silently on the stony ground. The long curls of her hair flew around her like snakes, whipping the spectators, who knelt, stretching their trembling arms toward her. Whoever was touched by one of the black curls fell to the ground, overcome with bliss, shouting thanks to the goddess and considering himself blessed forever. It was not human hair that touched the fortunate elect. It was the goddess herself, one of the 7. Faster and faster fly her decrepit legs. The young and vigorous hands of the drummers could barely keep up with her. But she did not think of following the beat of their music. She ran, she flew forward, staring straight ahead with her blank and motionless sockets at something invisible to our mortal eyes. She barely looked at her worshippers. Then her gaze would become full of fire, and whoever she looked at felt burned to the marrow of his bones. With every glance, she threw a few grains of rice. The small handful seemed inexhaustible, as if the wrinkled palm held Prince Fortunatus's bottomless purse. Suddenly, she stopped as though stupefied. The insane run around the fire had lasted 12 minutes, but we searched in vain for a trace of fatigue on the witch's deathly face. She paused only for a moment, just long enough for the goddess to release her. As soon as she felt free with a single bound, she leaped over the fire and plunged into the deep tank near the portico. This time, she dived only once, and while she remained under the water, the 2nd sister goddess entered her body. The little boy in white prepared another plate, with a fresh piece of burning camphor, just in time for the witch to grab it and hurry once more on her impetuous path. The colonel was sitting with his watch in his hand. During the 2nd possession, the witch ran, jumped, and darted about for exactly 14 minutes. After that, she dived twice into the tank in honor of the 2nd sister. And with each new possession, the number of dives increased until they reached 6. An hour and a half had already passed since the beginning of the first run. Throughout this time, the witch never rested, stopping only for a few seconds to disappear into the water. "She is a demon. She cannot be a woman," exclaimed the colonel, seeing the witch's head immersed in the water for the 6th time. "Hang me if I know," grumbled Mr. Y, nervously pulling his beard. "The only thing I know is that a cursed grain of rice got into my throat and I can't get it out." "Hush, hush. Please, be quiet," implored Sham Rao. By speaking, you will ruin the whole ritual. I looked at Narayan and lost myself in conjecture. His features, which were usually so calm and serene, were greatly altered at that moment by a deep shadow of suffering. His lips were trembling and the pupils of his eyes were dilated, as if from a dose of belladonna. His eyes were raised above the heads of the crowd, as if, in disgust, he were trying not to see what was before him and, at the same time, could not see it, enveloped in a deep trance that distanced him from us and from the entire ritual. What is the matter with him? Was my thought, but I had no time to ask, because the witch was once again in full action, chasing her own shadow. But with the seventh goddess the ritual was slightly altered. The old woman's running had changed to a bounding. Sometimes, crouching on the ground like a black panther, she would spring upon some worshipper and hesitate before he could touch his own forehead with her finger, while the tall, thin woman trembled with inaudible laughter. Then, again, as if turning away from the game with her shadow and being pursued by it, as if in some mysterious play, the witch appeared to us as a hideous caricature of Denora, dancing her mad dance. Suddenly, she straightened her body completely, darted toward the portico, and crouched before the smoking censer, striking her forehead on the granite steps. Another leap, and she was right near us, before the head of the monstrous civatherium. She knelt again and bowed her head to the ground several times, with the sound of an empty barrel striking against something hard. We barely had time to stand up and step back when she appeared on top of the civatherium's head, standing between the horns. Only Narayan did not move and, without fear, looked straight into the eyes of the frightening sorceress. But what was that? Who spoke in those deep masculine tones? The woman's lips were moving. From her chest issued those quick and abrupt phrases, but the voice sounded hollow, as if coming from under the ground. "Hush, hush," whispered Sham Rao, his entire body trembling. "She is going to prophesy." "She?" asked Mr. Y incredulously. "Is that a woman's voice? I don't believe it for a moment. Someone's uncle must be hiding somewhere. Not the fabulous uncle whom she has incarnated, but a living one." Sham Rao shuddered at the irony of this assumption and cast a desperate glance at the man who had spoken. "Woe unto you! Woe unto you!" echoed the voice. "Woe unto you, children of the impure Jaya and Vijaya, of the mockers and unbelievers who stand around the great door of Shiva, you who are cursed by 80,000 sages. Woe unto you who do not believe in the goddess Kali, and you who deny us, her 7 divine sisters, vultures of flesh and yellow legs, friends of the oppressors of our land, dogs who have no shame in eating from the same trough with the Baladi, foreigners. It seems to me that your prophetess merely foretells the past," said Mr. Y, philosophically putting his hands in his pockets. "I would say she is alluding to you, my dear Sham Rao." "Yes, and to us as well," muttered the colonel, who was evidently beginning to feel uncomfortable. As for the unfortunate Sham Rao, he was beginning to break into a cold sweat and tried to assure us that we were mistaken, that we did not fully understand her language. "It is not about you, it is not about you. It is of me that she speaks because I am in the government service." "Oh, she is inexorable. Rakshasas, Asuras," thundered the voice. "How dare you appear before us? How dare you stand on this sacred ground in boots made from the sacred skin of a cow? be cursed for all eternity. But her curse was not destined to be finished. In an instant, Narayan, like a Hercules, fell upon the Civatherium and scattered the entire pile, including the skull, the horns, and the demonic Pythia. Another second, and we thought we saw the witch flying through the air toward the portico. A confused vision of a robust, clean-shaven Brahmin, suddenly emerging from the Civatherium and instantly disappearing into the void below it, flashed before my dilated eyes. But, oh, after the third second had passed, we all came to the embarrassing conclusion that, judging by the loud noise of the cave door, the representative of the seven sisters had fled in a disgraceful manner. At the moment she disappeared from our inquisitive eyes into her subterranean domain, we all realized that the supernatural voice we had heard had nothing supernatural about it, and that it belonged to the Brahmin hidden under the Civatherium, to someone's living uncle, as Mr. Y had correctly suggested. Oh, Narayan! How carelessly, how chaotically the worlds revolve around us. I am beginning to seriously doubt their reality. From this moment on, I sincerely believe that all things in the universe are nothing but illusion, a mere Maya. I am becoming a Vedantin. I doubt that in the entire universe anything more objective can be found than a Hindu witch flying over a tank. Mrs. X woke up and asked what the reason was for all that noise. The din of many voices and the sounds of many retreating footsteps, along with the general agitation of the crowd, had startled her. She listened to us with a condescending smile and a few yawns, and went back to sleep. The next morning at dawn we very reluctantly, it must be admitted, tried to say goodbye to Sham Rao with his good heart and kindness. Narayan's simple victory weighed heavily on his mind. His faith in the holy hermit and the seven goddesses had been quite shaken by the shameful surrender of the sisters, who had yielded at the first blow from a mere mortal. But, during the dark hours of the night, he had found time to reflect upon the matter and dispel the uncomfortable feeling of having unintentionally deceived and disappointed his European friends. Sham Rao still seemed bewildered when he greeted us at our parting, expressing the best wishes of his family and himself. As for the heroes of this true narrative, they mounted their elephants once again and directed their heavy steps toward the main road and Jabalpur. End of the book, A Witch's Den. Do you want access to this and all the complete audiobooks on the channel, plus the ebook version? Click the link in the description or scan the QR code in the left corner of the screen to access our library, where you can listen to your favorite esoteric books without ad interruptions, lock your screen, or use other apps while the narration plays, and even download the ebook version to follow along as you listen. Listen on your computer via web browser, or download the app from the Play Store. After subscribing, you will receive an email with your login details, password, and step-by-step instructions on how to access the books through the Hotmart app.